Hey, friends, and welcome to this series of Shop Talk interviews that dives deep into the creative process of making comics, writing books, and adapting classic stories. My name is Lex Fajardo. I'm a cartoonist and the creator of the graphic novel series Kid Beowulf, an action-adventure series that reimagines Beowulf and Grendel as 12-year-old twin brothers and follows their journey across Europe and Asia, where they meet fellow epic heroes therein. The newest book in the series is Kid Beowulf Odyssey, and it's kickstarting this month at KIRBYComicKickstarter.com, and it's sponsoring this series of creator interviews. My guest today is Chris Schweizer, a three-time Eisner Award-nominated cartoonist, author, and illustrator. Chris is the creator behind the graphic novel series The Crogan Adventures, The Creeps, Maker Comics Fix-A-Car, and The Roanoke Colony, America's First Mystery. Chris is also the illustrator behind the Image Comics series Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton, and his newest cartooning adventure is the webcomic OUTLAW'S Apprentice, which you can read for free at his Patreon page or WEBTOON. But if books are more your thing, then you are in luck because this month, the first book in the series, Broken Blade, is kickstarting right now. So hop over to Kickstarter.com and support both our books, which is what we talk about in this Shop Talk interview. If you are a process junkie, you're going to really like this interview. We dive deep into all kinds of things, mainly Chris's main work, Outlaw's Apprentice, and his other work, which you can read at patreon.com. I've been a longtime fan of Chris's work, so this supersized edition is best served if you are at your own drawing table, writing, drawing, or inking comics. We dive into a lot of good things, and you're going to enjoy it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this Shop Talk interview. So anyway, Chris, thanks so much for joining me today on this Shop Talk. And as I mentioned, I've always loved chatting with cartoonists about comics and craft and storytelling. And I think you're one of the best in the biz. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on board in our respective studios and talk. And there's a lot that I'd love to talk about. You know, I've been a longtime fan of your work, going all the way back to the Crogan Adventure days. In fact, I was looking at the dates. I think our books, Crogan's Vengeance, and then my first Kid Beowulf book, both came out in 2008. Maybe, does that sound right?
Okay, that I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, I know that's when Crogan came out. I didn't see Kid Beowulf until a couple of years later, so I will have to trust you on that being the release of it.
Yeah, no, I think because that came out with Oni, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my first iteration came out with a small publisher back out of Portland, and so anyway, we were sort of in the same circles around the same time, and long career since then. So it's just great to see your trajectory and all the great projects you've done along the way. And you know, and I'd love to get to those, and I'd love to talk to you about your perceptions of the industry and like how it's changed in that 20 plus years, because I think you'd have a lot of great insight to share. But before we get to that, I just want to congratulate you on the launch of your newest work, Outlaw's Apprentice, which is debuted as a webcomic on WEBTOON and also your Patreon. And we're going to throw links in there so folks can catch up to it if they haven't already seen it. But congrats on that launch, and tell me about Outlaw's Apprentice, where the story came from, and how you would describe to someone who hasn't actually read it yet.
Okay. Well, it is a swashbuckling fantasy adventure story. I have always liked the trappings of fantasy while not necessarily feeling specifically connected to the genre in its larger sense. Like, there are a lot of individual works within the fantasy genre that I like, but I've never been a huge overall fantasy buff, partially because the magic is not particularly interesting to me. And a lot of fantasy is very magic heavy. And so, but I really like running through the woods and sword fighting and fighting monsters and things along those lines. And so it eventually the idea that it needed to be European in its world structure, I realized that it didn't have to be, and that's where everything kind of clicked for me. I I used to do historical fiction, and when I would do that, a lot of times I would think of a time and place first and research that, and that research would present the meat of the story. It would suggest the conflict, it would suggest the set pieces and the things along those lines. And so once I kind of clicked that I could make the fantasy world, while still having castles and swords, feel a lot closer to my own native area, which is the southeastern United States, and more specifically Greater Appalachia, that's when everything clicked for me. And so it pulls a lot from early 19th century US history and regional identity and things along those lines to shape it, but still has a lot of the structural stuff of the things that I love: swashbucklers, kung fu movies, samurai stories, things along those lines, and kind of all put in a bag and put out together as an episodic duo traveling the country and righting wrongs when those wrongs are placed in front of them, type of thing, which is a really convoluted answer. I don't have a good elevator pitch, obviously.
You're still working on the one sentence pitch.
Yeah, but it's a basically the one sentence pitch is that there's this pair, a kid who is apprenticed to an artisan who used to be a mercenary. They find themselves on the other side of the law, and the kid figures out a loophole that they can stay ahead of the law for 3-day windows by basically becoming employees of other people. And so the doing of that requires them to take on dangerous jobs that other people won't do. Sometimes that's helping people out. Sometimes it's being in the employ of bad people and having to figure out how to circumvent that. And it lends itself a lot to, sort of those episodic Western adventures of the 60s, Have Gun Will Travel, Wanted Dead or Alive, where you have kind of this framework of what will place these characters in an adventure situation, and then each adventure requires different ways to extricate themselves. And so it's something that I'm really having a whole lot of fun with. And like you said, it started serializing, and this is the first time I've ever serialized a narrative story. And I really like that because, as a general rule, I work chronologically anyway, when I'm writing and things along those lines. And I think it will lend itself well to my process as it continues on beyond what I've already written.
Right. Yeah. So I think as of our recording, the most recent episode was episode 7. And the episodic framework from the reader's point of view, is working very nicely. It's very engaging. I've enjoyed what you've posted so far. And I actually have a lot of questions regarding format and choicing and your thought process there. But before I get into that, I think you mentioned you're not a fan of fantasy worlds because of the magic element, which I think I share that.
And I don't always dislike it, but I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I just mean there are plenty of magic-oriented things that I have enjoyed. Just as a rule, I am part of this is, we project ourselves onto the things that we read and things along those lines. And I think that for a lot of people, there is, fantasy, whether it be superhero stuff or things like that, there is a degree of wish fulfillment and power fantasy and stuff along those lines as it relates. And I you know, very inaccurately always thought, well, I could handle myself in physical scenarios, ergo I don't need characters to have abilities beyond those that humans usually have. It's easier for me to place myself into a world where somebody can learn how to sword fight versus where somebody can learn how to do magic. And so I always felt much more of a connection with non-magic type of stuff as a
Yeah.
kid, and probably and
No.
continue to do so as a result.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think from my point of view, magic systems, I generally they just seem a little wishy-washy for my personal taste in
Mhm.
telling a story. I like sort of the more earthbound, there's if there's any sort of magic for my stuff, it's sort of like the primal mythological, don't really know how it
Mhm.
works, but it's sort of nature bound.
Yeah. And you have a
Yeah,
lot of creatures, and I think of that as a very different thing. Like, I think that you can have fantastical elements while it's still feeling very grounded. And I think that you've got uh, all of your sort of traditional mythological creatures, whether those be Roman or Greek or Norse or what have you. And they don't feel as though they're not something that you could encounter if you wandered into this world.
right. Yeah. Um, where I was trying to get to though is despite the, like you mentioned, world building,
Mhm.
and from the the episodes I've read of Outlaw's Apprentice, there is a considerable amount of world building that you've done. In particular, like the latest episode, there's a very intricate legal system that you've developed. And can you walk me through like how you arrived at this
Yeah,
this
the
space?
the biggest difficulty with that kind of thing is how little can you put into the narrative and still allow the narrative to work? Because a lot of most of my favorite books, my favorite adventure novels, swashbuckling stuff, whether that's True Grit or Three Musketeers or Robin Hood or whatever else, it's they're all built very heavily on the specific time and place in which those stories are taking place. Like, you cannot, I mean, people do try to extricate them from the greater context of what's going on in the worlds at that time, and it lessens the overall work when that is done. I think that really does shape what the characters are doing, and so it's important to me, if I'm creating a world that the audience doesn't know, to provide them with the same degree of context that you get about France in the 1620s when you're reading Three Musketeers. You don't have to know France inside and out, but you do have to know the basic mechanisms of how the king and the cardinal are you know, working together slash not working together. How the musketeers work in regards to the larger military structure. And it's just a couple of lines, but those couple of lines help to define what those characters need to do and why they need to do it. And so I wanted to make sure that that was how I get that across in mind, that it creates a sense of, this is what things are supposed to be, this is how it's being misused, and this is the consequence for regular people. And so I actually did that. I wrote up a little when it kind of clicked as to what I wanted my thing to be, which is basically that there is effectively a constitutional system, and there are bad actors who have found means by which to circumvent that system to their own ends. Once I figured that out, I sat down and did just a little one page with sketches, how this government works. And that was actually the first thing that I did for Outlaw's Apprentice. I didn't draw the two lead characters for the first time until the day after that.
Mm.
And because I knew I knew sort of what I wanted, and once I had that world, it really brought into sharp relief what it is that I wanted. And so part of it was just having that absolute basic bare bones what's the system of government? How is power divided? How is power limited uh, in to the to for the safety and benefit of its people? And how can those limits be circumvented? And once I had that, everything else kind of fell into place. And so then it was just kind of pulling in, and we haven't gotten to this yet. I haven't shared a map or anything like that, but I've got a little map of the country that they're going to be moving across. And a lot of the country is really influenced. The way I drew that map and was thinking about it, there's a book that I really like by Colin Woodard, who's a historian who I initially found because he did a book about pirates called Empire of the Blue Water. Oh wait, no, he did Republic of Pirates. He didn't do Empire of the Blue Water. Republic of Pirates. And he did a book called American Nations, which is about the different regional identity of 11, I think, maybe 13 different parts of the United States and sections of Canada, and how the people who moved there shaped those identities and things along those lines. And similar identities to those are what I used for Outlaw's Apprentice. Like basically each part pulls pretty heavily from a section of the US. In a way that a lot of fantasy things like, well, this is the part that's Italy, this is the part that's Rome, this is the part that is Constantinople, this is whatever. I really wanted this to feel like something that readers could, at least North American readers, could see their own culture reflected through a fantasy lens with, that I think is not frequently done through pre-industrial stuff. I think we get a lot of post-industrial stuff, steampunk things and stuff along those lines, 1930s stuff, Harlem, whatever. But I don't think we get a lot of swords and castles stuff that still feels very North American, for the obvious reason that we didn't have swords and castles to the degree that the Europeans did. But I think that there's a lot of ways that these can overlap. So for the world building stuff, a lot of it was just pulling in elements of the history that I've done the most research with, which is usually last 300 years, and a lot of it being North American, and seeing parallels in Europe and seeing parallels in Asia and Africa and South America, and figuring out like how can these things kind of cohese into a vibrant new world that both feels familiar and also feels fresh, that creates set pieces that are going to be fun for the characters to move through and for the audience to feel immersed in, and but that also I feel like I can speak to with experience in a way that I can't when I'm dealing with European stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you've really struck a nice balance of that, European classic influence, but very much framed in an Americana that is fantasized, that you're developing whole cloth, but you can see the building blocks as a reader, and it's really fun to see that take shape. And I especially like, when I recall the prologue, the opening set piece in the first episode, you mentioned it a couple of times, like you like to sort of bring in a swashbuckling tone, and it did remind me, like the vernacular and the dialogue in particular, of like being in a Robert Louis Stevenson book. And I imagine that's intentional. There's almost like a theatricality to some of those characters and how they're speaking. And
I think absolutely. I like using dialogue to suggest a different time and place. And I try to minimize that with my leads a little bit. Like they'll still occasionally have a more poetic turn of phrase, but just like with costume design, with physical shape, I think your main characters are the ones to which your audience is going to feel the most akin and the closest. And so you kind of pull back that period immersion. I say period immersion as if I'm referencing any specific period, and I'm not. But I really love the language of uh, especially late 19th and early 20th century, like romantic fiction. Not romantic in the sense of smooching, but romantic in the sense of in the classical sense. And a lot of that sort of does lend itself to more theatrical language and phrases that are a little do feel a little bit more poetic, like they're thought through. And did people ever actually talk like that? I think people always wrote like that, but
Mm.
you can look at the difference between, when you get to American stuff, especially, you can look at the difference between something like uh what's that book called? The Log of a Cowboy, something like that, Andy something, and Charles Portis, and see the difference between, like, or David Milch or anybody like that who's using this overtly poetic language that gives it the sense that it is from a previous time versus what's actually said. And you can read, diaries or court transcripts or things like that from the 1870s, and people sound pretty close to how they sound now. Like that poetry is an invention, but it's an invention that I really like, and I think
Right.
that those lines can sometimes stick with you, uh, and it does help you feel like you're in a different place. And I remember in I guess early college, probably, there's a movie that I absolutely, my favorite movie is Rob Roy, which is a 1994 Liam Neeson Jessica Lange movie. And there was one of the things that I really loved about it was the Alan Sharp's script was so the syntax and the sentence structure felt so foreign. It was eminently understandable, like you never had to parse the meaning, but it really did feel transportative in the sense that you are in this time and this place, and that is different from the time and the place that we're in. And that's an impression that I want readers to get. Like, I really want them to feel that way when they're reading it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely that's there, and as you move through the episodes, it's uh it feels of the place, it feels natural. Nothing feels reads forced. And that's especially hard to do, I think, in comics,
Yeah.
to get that voice for the reader in your head. So you've done a nice job with
Well,
that.
thank you so much. And I fiddle with those a lot. I'll keep reworking the dialogue until it sounds right. It doesn't hurt that I pretty much always write, possibly to my professional detriment, as though I'm speaking. When I'm typing an email, like, I will use gotta instead of have to. I will use apostrophe em instead of them, which I know is weird in an email, but I write the way that I think, and I think the way that I speak, and so I have a lot of practice off the page, speaking conversationally, and there is a balance with it, because I do sometimes find myself writing something that isn't as clear as it should be, and I'll have to go back and rework that. And we were talking about shop talk and process and things along those lines. Something that I do, so I write I don't do a script. I basically go to a rough version of the page, and I work out my dialogue and my image at
You're
the
one of
same time.
those.
Yeah.
Man,
Um,
you're like that special cartoonist animal because I'm script forward. So tell me
yeah.
about this, because I've always wanted to understand it.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, and a big part of it for me is that, uh, and again, and not all music people do the same thing. Like, I mean, there are a lot of music people that break things up into lyrics first and then music, or vice versa. But uh, to me, composing a comics page feels a lot like composing music, in that the melody and the lyrics and the accompanying notes and everything like that, they're all contributing factors, and each affects the other. And I cannot envision what's going to happen with one until I do, and each one influences. And as I put them down, sometimes I will go and write a swath of dialogue and I'll be ready to put it in. And once I start, plugging it into the pages, I'll realize, oh, this is getting cut. This whole second half of the thing, I'm cutting because this expression makes it very clear that this is where the scene ends. And so then I need to think, well, what was there any necessary or pertinent information after that that needs to be worked in? I'll go back and see if I can work it in earlier and make sure that it's part of things. But the page, and not to sound too hoity-toity artsy with it, but like the page to me dictates so much of what happens next. Like a character's, how I draw a character emoting or what they're doing with their hands or something along those lines suggests what's going to happen in the next panel. And sometimes I will have, I also, the spacing makes a difference. Like I build around my word balloons. And so sometimes I'll have a bit of dialogue that I need. And I realize I don't have as much space as I should. And so like, I will have a character bending down to tie their shoes in order to create the space that's needed. And then because they're tying their shoes, I think, are the other characters stopping and waiting? And so then that changes what they're doing in the next panel for explicitly formal reasons in the previous panel, but now it starts to become narrative reasons, and the way that the characters are interacting and interacting with their environment and interacting with their scene are determined by some of those formal characteristics that affect the character behavior, and then that character behavior affects the narrative. And so for me, it's very helpful to do that. But in terms of writing the dialogue and shaping the dialogue, 95 times out of 100, the dialogue is what it's going to be, but it's also very much written to fit the space that I have. So my sentence in the last panel of a page is going to be dictated almost exclusively by how much space that panel gives me, because I've already done I do these are smaller pages because they're for scrolling format and it's going to be a smaller book, and so I'll usually have like 3 sort of landscapey panels per page or somewhere in that average. And so when I get to that last panel on a page, the first 2, the dialogue dictates how big those panels are. The last page, the panel size dictates what the dialogue is going to be. And sometimes I'll know that going in, and so the next panel I'll think, okay, well, I will purposefully give myself smaller panel on the at the beginning so that it's not always tiny panel at the bottom, because that tends to be what I've given myself space for. And so I'll either make the second panel bigger, or I will purposefully try to trim the top just so that it doesn't always look like I'm beholden to that. But that does, and sometimes even the shape of the word balloon, like if I have dialogue that there's no way to break it up to where it's not 2 long lines and 1 small word on the bottom, I will try to rethink it to where I can add more words on the bottom so that it creates a better text block. So there's a lot of trying to marry content and the formal aspects in a way that's largely intuitive. Like, I mean, it makes it sound like I'm putting a lot of thought into this, but it's putting thought into it the same way that you put thought into the different aspects of driving when you're driving. Like, you're not looking at the speedometer and thinking about the maps and trying to remember traffic laws. And I mean, you are when you're first starting to drive, just like you're trying to think of all these things when you're first starting to do comics. But eventually all of it you're aware of your surroundings, and you're thinking about all these things in tandem, and then your attention is focused on this one specific thing at this one specific moment because you see that there's an issue there. But most of it is just stuff that kind of happens as you're doing it. And you can look back and say, well, I did this because of this, but you're not necessarily consciously thinking about those in the act of doing them unless a problem presents itself.
Right. Well, there's just a lot to unpack there. I'm particularly struck by the description of how you said, like, oh well, if there's a bit of dialogue and I'm gonna show the character bending down to tie his shoes, but then the other character is gonna react to that. The way you describe how you're building your comics, again, I sort of go back to the idea of there's a theatricality to it. Like,
Mhm.
when you're watching good theater or even, a good movie, the everyone's reacting to naturally to what's happening, and
Mhm.
it seems as though that's very much an intentional thing as you're telling your story.
It is, and again, it's intentional. Almost everything I'm doing is both intentional and intuitive. And it's intuitive because it was intentional for a while until it becomes a second nature. But yeah, the my hope with any of the comics that I do is that you can't remove a panel.
Mhm.
That once you do that, it the it's like editing something in a movie, and a fight scene or something, and like suddenly these characters aren't where they need to be for the next thing to work right. And so you that sense of cause and effect in both the interactions of the characters with each other, with their environment, the way that the dialogue is bouncing back and forth against each other. um I very much want to make sure that everything feels like it leads into the next thing, and each thing that precedes something is the reason that the next thing exists. Because I think that helps with narrative propulsion. Like you said, I've got some world building in there. I've got things like that. It can be very easy for that stuff to feel extremely boring, and
Mhm.
cumbersome, and what are these characters doing, and things along those lines. And I think that the more of that feeling that everything matters because you see how it's leading into the next thing, there's a rhythm to it, that makes it to where things feel less boring, and I have a little more freedom to include some of those world building things, which I think do have a very high potential of turning a reader off, or tuning a reader out, or making them otherwise feel like they want to skip something. My hope is that I'm never creating a panel that you feel like you want to skip.
Yeah, no, and I hear you on those moments when you're writing something, and there sometimes you need exposition. You have to, there's the
Mhm.
the the framing that is absolutely necessary to move the story forward, but
Yeah.
it's also kind of clunky, and like, how do you, and yeah, we always want to avoid the big massive dialogue balloon,
Yeah.
but you've done a nice
The
job of
well, the
weaving
last
all those elements in.
the last that last chapter, that long one, that's just 20 pages of people standing there giving exposition. Um and I wish that I don't wish, like, I wanted it to build the tension that then has a tension release, but you that's I think going to be the only time that happens in the series, because I needed that framework to exist to suggest everything else. And anytime I have expository stuff going forward, hopefully they're going to be doing things. They're building a fire, they're going through their sword fighting exercises, there's something else, and they can have that dialogue atop a narratively progressive thing that's happening with their hands. You can see how something is changing. I like the idea of them building something or taking something apart or something while they're doing it, because you can see the progression of physical consequence while they're going through this, and so it makes it feel a little less like you're just hitting with exposition, because you do need exposition, and I love exposition. Like, I'm not anti-exposition, but in a visual narrative, especially, like in a novel, it's different. Like, you can read something, and revelation in a novel can be thrilling in and of itself, but it's hard to do that when it's just character heads.
This Shop Talk episode is brought to you by the books we make. Get your copy of Kid Beowulf Odyssey and Outlaw's Apprentice, funding now at KICKSTARTER.com. Now back to the interview. You you did a nice job, I think, in the most recent episode, where there is, as we say, this deep exposition between, and lots of back and forth and contentious words between Otis and the is it Sir Win?
Yeah.
And so as a reader, you're invested, you're reading, you're trying to follow along and get all the nuances of the legal system you've laid out. But then there's this really clever thing you do where is it Urska?
Urska, yeah.
Urska. She's Otis's uh companion. He is her apprentice. And she's sort of reading the situation in the room, thinking for a way to, like, how can I get us out of this, what's becoming a pretty dangerous situation. And you sort of, the camera's closing in on her and her thought process, and she's sort of eyeing this guard, and at the same time the dialogue is also getting pushed out of the panel, and it's a really interesting way that you're getting into her headspace and she's not really listening, and then there's this great turn. And I thought that was really masterful, how it's exposition, but it's also a character moment. And so anyway, I just enjoyed that.
Well, thank you so much,
reveal.
Alex. I appreciate it. And that's something I really like with comics in general, is some of the formal stuff that you could do, especially with word balloons. Almost all of my formal components are word balloon based, because I am not a particularly experimental person. Like, there's a lot of formal stuff that I love to play with, but the formal stuff that I love to play with is still very formally conservative. I'm not pushing the envelope with anything. I'm just trying to see how well I can do something within the confines of the envelope that I have. And so but I think that, like, lettering is the one place where I really like to play. And but if I'm really consistent with how I handle lettering, like, I keep all my word balloons on the same plane as the character that is speaking. So, like, you're not going to have a tree in front of somebody and a character standing next to it and the word balloon in front of the tree. I want to make sure that that we do create a sense of planes where the character is in relation to the reader, and that their word balloon is going to remain consistent to that. But if I do that and I am very consistent with it, then I can use word balloons to suggest proximity to the reader. By you see something coming from off panel where it's play, and I do a lot of off panel dialogue, like, just because, for the same reason that when you're watching a movie, like, you don't always see the person talking. I just think it creates a more dynamic sequence. Sometimes when you see reactions and things along those lines, just also just to keep it from being stagnant during monologues. And but I think that in doing so, you can crop a word balloon and that tells you something, or you can have a thing coming from off panel, and whether it's partially obscuring or partially behind a planar element, where it is in relation to the other character. Like, I think that, like, that spatial relationship of the balloons to the characters is important, and that's something I really like to play with.
I mean, going back to what you said before about, like, it's your approach to making comics seems to be at once intuitive, but then at the same time, like, very you're clearly thinking about it, whether or not you're it's top of mind or not. It's like it's sort of, it seems like it's in the bones. And I want to, I guess what comes to mind is, like, who would you cite are some of your primary influences in that visual comic storytelling that seems so very innate
Probably
to your own process?
the biggest one, and you don't see it as much aesthetically anymore. It used to be more obvious that I was trying to be him when I used a brush, but Jeff Smith was really big. I read Bone in high school and college, and it was one of the things that really made me want to be a cartoonist. Usagi Yojimbo is a big one for especially how he allows the characters to, I don't know, like sort of break the physics of anatomy in order to convey a sense of movement. And so like his, sometimes an arm will bend a little bit way, or somebody will, contort in a way that feels very natural and flowy. And so he's a big influence with how the individual moments of action are depicted. When it comes to how action is depicted in terms of consequence, I had a Steve Ditko Spider-Man book when I was little, one of the Marvel Masterworks. I think I got it in 3rd grade, which had the first 10 issues. And Ditko is one of those guys who, there's I love to break things into binaries just because it's easy. And so I think of, like Ditko action versus Kirby action. And Kirby action is the sense of action. Like you understand what's happening. You get a feel for it. And it can be very dynamic, and it can feel very immersive. Ditko action is very diagram-esque. Like you can reenact a Ditko action sequence. If you give a Kirby action sequence and say three different people act this out, they're all going to act it out a different way. You give them a Ditko action sequence, they're all doing the exact same thing because there is a step A, step B, step C to anything that's happening. And I very much am in that Ditko school. And part of that is also I wanted to be, when I was in high school, I assumed, I don't know if assumed is the right word, but if you had asked me like, well, what's your dream job? I would have said martial arts fight choreographer for movies. And so I knew I liked doing theater stuff. I had been a theater kid before I moved to Kentucky. There weren't very many opportunities once I moved to Kentucky. And so I didn't do that as much. But I liked acting, I liked movies, and I was very, like, martial arts was my main thing when I was in middle school and high school and early college. And so it seemed natural to me that I would kind of combine those things. And so so now when I'm doing comics, I think of those action scenes as how does this specifically play out? And so comics wise, Ditko was the guy for that. But a lot of my comics language comes from strips. I didn't read all that many comic books. As a kid, I had like I said, I had the Marvel Masterworks. I had some G.I. Joes. But generally speaking, the thing that I read consistently from the time I was able to read up through when I wanted to do comics, the one thing that I never wavered on was strip collections. So I read a lot of Calvin and Hobbes started around when I learned to read. And so, that was a standard for me. Billiman's Foxtrot very much influenced how I pace dialogue. Like I'd say it's probably my biggest influence in terms of dialogue pacing. And I just read every strip I could get my hands on. Peanuts was a big one. Pogo was a big one. And so those really kind of form the foundational backbone of how I see comics is through newspaper strips that I mostly read through collections.
Yeah, that's we have a very sort of on the same line in terms of our formal comics education. Just thinking about this, the Ditko versus Kirby fight analysis. I could say, yes, Ditko is clearly choreographing something, which is great when you're in a visual medium. And then, the sense of Kirby is like, here's a guy who was in a lot of brawls, and this is probably what it felt like. And that's sort of just interesting.
And I think, and I don't think that one is in any way better than the others. They're just two very different approaches to conveying something that is hard to convey in static images. And I think it's really neat that there's there. And there are going to be times where you do want to convey more the sense of things than the mechanisms of things. And so I think that you can go back and forth. And I think that I mentioned Usagi, Stan Sakai's samurai rabbit comic, if there's anybody unfamiliar with it. And Stan, most of the time, is a Kirby guy. Like he will show individual moments in a fight that are of narrative consequence, but they aren't necessarily following a linear progression. But then sometimes that linear progression will be very plot specific, and he will shift into DITKO mode. And so you can be inclined to one and occasionally still make use of the other as the story demands.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up both Jeff Smith and Stan Sakai, because I have both of your sketchbooks. I have this one from what year is this one?
That one's 2011. So it's
2011.
It's got a few years on it now.
Yeah, yeah. And then this one, which is a little more recent, I think the date is 2017 to 2021. And it is interesting because when I look through those both sketchbooks, the first one is I do see Jeff Smith, the bold brushwork, the very clean black and white drawings, and then there seems to be a pivot to more of what I would describe as a Stan Sakai sort of line work approach, thinner line work in your later work. And I guess my question to you was that a deliberate move? Was that conscious? Was that happening consciously, or just something that was happening naturally? Or
again, a intuitive but considered. I think so with the brushwork and a lot of that early stuff looking like a poor man's Jeff Smith, that was because that's what I wanted my comics to look like. Like I liked Jeff Smith.
I will fully cop to that too. So
yeah.
Poor man's Jeff Smith. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted my comics to look like that, and I liked the brush guys. Like they were my favorite, I liked Craig Thompson, I liked Seth, I liked Watterson, of course. Like there was this sense that this is Walt Kelly's another one, that this is sort of the purest type of comic art, or these thick and thin lines, and that sense of pure black and white without any caveats. And that was never really my natural inclination so far as drawing went. Like I could do it, but I couldn't really control it. And I also it wasn't the way that I drew when I was coming up with stuff. So like when I was drawing in my sketchbook, when I was doing stuff from life, things like that, I would usually use a small fixed line pen. And that was sort of my natural language. And the brush was what I thought it needed to be before I presented it to the public. And so I started doing, I was teaching at the time, and I was trying to get my students to be faster because I was pretty fast, and a lot of them were not. And so I was like, well, let's do this. Let's start doing some timed challenges where we do, I think we were going to do a 20-minute color, like start to color thing. And we did, and this is also moving from paper, scanning it in, and then coloring it digitally or coloring it with, whatever it might be. And I did those, maybe 3 days worth of those, probably about 6 or 7 of them. And I was like, oh, whoops, I should have been doing this the whole time, because I started drawing the way that I draw in my sketchbook, which is sort of a little bit more loose and with a fixed line pen. And those drawings don't look nearly as good as did the ink work when it's in pure black and white. But once I added the color in, the color could do a little bit of lifting. The drawings were stronger than my brushwork was once it was in color. I also found that in doing those fixed line drawings and doing finished ones, I was really cheating an awful lot on my drawings. Like my hands were not remotely the way that hands work, was sort of the biggest cheat. But because I could create a nice brush line, like I could create a fluidity of line, I could get away with ornamentation over a poor structural foundation. And I found that when I moved to doing, sort of these nearer to fixed line drawings, I couldn't get away with that. And it forced me to work on drawing stuff, and continues to force me to work on drawing stuff that I am not that strong at. I'm still not great with hands, but I've been working at them hard for 10 years, and I'll continue to work at them hard for another 10 years, and then maybe 10 years after that, they'll be good, but they're not there yet. But they're fine. They're perfectly serviceable for the stories that I'm telling. But they don't come naturally to me. But that was a big part of the shift, is once color became an option. When I first started out, any small press stuff had to be in black and white for economics. Like nobody could print in color. And
Right.
now if you're getting something commercially printed, there is almost no difference, in quantity. Like if you're doing KDP on demand, yeah, there's a big difference between black and white and color. But if you're printing 1,000 books or more, you're rarely looking at much of a difference between black and white and color printing. Like the paper and the binding are where the money goes. And so publishers now don't have that restriction on it. The main restriction is, do you have the time to do color? Or do you have the economic resources available to hire somebody to color for you? Those are more of an issue than the actual economics of printing color. And so once I started doing color, first digitally and then also in watercolors, which I started doing because I was sharing a room with Matt Kent and Brian Hurt, and they were doing these joint commissions where Brian would sketch something and Matt would watercolor it. I had never had any luck inking on watercolor paper. It felt very wrong to me. It was slow to dry. I dragged my hands all over everything, so I'm smearing the ink everywhere, etc. And they were just doing it on Bristol, and I said, you can watercolor on Bristol? And Matt was like, you can watercolor on anything that's not slick. And so I started doing it in my sketchbook, and I realized you can just watercolor on cardstock and then it dries instantly. And that had me starting to do watercolor, and clumsily at first, but a little bit more. I still don't have nearly the degree of control over it that would be necessary to do any pages. Like I've never done a book with watercolor, and I can't imagine doing so possibly ever, but definitely not in the near future. But I can do individual images with watercolor and feel very satisfied with how that comes out. But once I started incorporating color, that was the biggest change. I could use fewer lines. The lines that I used didn't have to have thicks or thins. And so that really was the main transformation aesthetically between the brush style and the pen style.
I'm familiar with your watercolor work with the papercraft material that you share on Patreon and elsewhere, and the beautiful like movie posters that you've done. But Outlaws Apprentice is digitally colored, but it does have. Am I right about that? And
yeah,
it's
digitally colored.
Yeah, but there is that. You can sort of see that watercolor influence, and I might be too.
One absolutely affects the other. Like my watercolor work, where it is strong because of learning to do things digitally, and a lot of the digital stuff is stronger because of a traditional foundation. there is a way that I have historically colored people digitally with cell shading that is to some degree absent any kind of real how human faces work. It's just treating things like a shape. And having done more actual people and seeing, well, actually, the lower part of your eyelid protrudes out. And when you're shading, I used to always shade like the eye socket as just a pocket of dark. And now I'm like, well, the eyelid actually catches light. So I'm doing, and that's because I was trying to draw real people. And now that influences how I color stuff. And so I had in the most recent episode, like the bad guy is standing next to a fire and being lit underneath. And I'm coloring it in a way where it's accentuating some of that anatomical dimensionality that I would not have colored it that way prior to having done watercolors of people and trying to figure out how to make a shape look, how to make a face look the way that it really looks.
Got it. Yeah. I
Because
think
we're
it's
always
interesting.
learning, we're learning and we're
Yeah,
growing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Project.
I guess if I were to just try to describe your line work painterly thing, the word that comes to mind actually is it does evoke kind of a stained glass pictures. And I think it's interesting that Otis, that the opening image we have of Otis as a young man, he is drawing this image of a stained glass, what will become a stained glass window. And I don't know, again, I don't know if it's intentional or not on your part, but your drawings sort of evoke the artwork that I sometimes think of when I think of stained glass.
That is wholly unintentional, but the kind of reading that I really like, where somebody's like, well, look, this form matches function in a way that I did not intend, but I certainly wouldn't sneeze at that interpretation of the art or that approach. Like, I think that's a really fun way of seeing parallels there.
Yeah, no, I'm as I said, I'm probably reading way too much into it, but hey,
No,
it worked for me
that's our
as the
job.
reader.
Our job
So
is to
yeah,
read too much into stuff.
right, right. Um, yeah, there's it's funny when I think of your drawings, I'm going back to, this one, and part of this shop talk thing is that I'm linking it to what I'm working on with my new book, The Odyssey, and it's sort of linked to the Christopher Nolan The Odyssey movie that's coming out, and you have not done a lot of Greek stuff to my memory, but the stuff that you have done, like for instance, there's a paper crafter set that you want to do of the Trojan War, and you've got this beautiful image of Aeneas carrying his father, and a great image of the Minotaur, Medusa. Every time I see your drawings, especially from that realm, I'm like, that's the way it should look. Like everything you draw is like the way it should look, and so it just props to you because you have such a. And I guess my question, if there is a question in there, is what is your approach to like adaptation? For instance, like how did you arrive at that image of the Minotaur or Aeneas or Odysseus, or when it comes to that approach?
Well,
Can
I
you
wanted
quantify
to
it?
like, yeah. So, I was Jiminy Christmas. It's hard to articulate your own principles of work, and somebody put alt text on an image that I did recently, and said something like it's drawn in the Chris Schweizer style, which is, and then he described the Chris Schweizer style. I was like, hey, that's it. There you go. Now I've been parsed down into two sentences, and it works really well. But the
Do
way
you
that
recall what
that
it
person
was?
just small details built around a novel concept. And so the argument being that like I will, and that is what I hope to do when I'm doing adaptation stuff, is to find something that does feel familiar, but see, is there one aspect of it that I can push that will make it feel fresh? And then what can I do to make that freshness feel grounded? like what can give it verisimilitude. And so like for the Minotaur, there's a type of cow there is a type of cow breed or bull breed that looks very old world, and I'm faking it because I'm pretty sure that there's no documentation of this type of cow existing before Turkey in like the 1500s. So it is very doubtful that it existed in ancient Rome, but or excuse me, in ancient Greece or pre-Greece in Mycenae. But it looks old and of a different era in the same way that like Highland cows feel very old world. And it's just this big bulky thing, and it's white, and it's got the black nose and stuff. And so I wanted to pull it with that. And then also, well, does it have the little nose ring things that the for steering that some of the cows of this era would have? Like, would it be wearing any kind of stuff? Does it have hands? Does it have hooves? And just making these decisions kind of as I go. And then so that one's a little bit of a cheat, because I am pulling something that's very specifically not period.
Well,
But the
I would
people
I would
don't have
just
a context for whether or not it's period, except for real like cow genealogy people, and they're gonna hate it. But
well, I was just gonna say that in several of the stories, like the Minotaur comes from the bull from the sea that was sent,
Mhm.
to Crete, and in many readings that bull was white. So
Yeah,
whether so there is that connection right there that is
yeah.
really nicely done on your part.
Well,
The
thank
other
you
thing I was
very
going to
much.
add is, like you did this terrific image for me of Beowulf and
Mhm.
Grendel. I don't know if you remember this.
Oh yeah.
And when I got this, I was like, again, like, damn, that's how they should look. And it's just like it's that
I just drew them how you
you
drew them, but in my style, So yeah.
but the Chris Schweizer style is just it's terrific, and I love that placement on my characters. I couldn't draw them this way because
Mhm.
but I love just the thought that you put into specifically Grendel looks terrific. He looks like the swamp monster. It's just everything you do has like there's this level of care and thought that I appreciate as a creator because I can see it on the page, but it doesn't feel forced. It
Mhm.
feels just as if that's the way it ought to be. This Shop Talk episode is brought to you by the books we make. Get your copy of Kid Beowulf Odyssey and Outlaw's Apprentice, funding now at KICKSTARTER.com. Now back to the interview.
Thank you so much. That is the goal with it, is for it to, I especially if I'm doing characters that people know, but characters that people know that aren't necessarily assigned to a specific iconography. So like Mickey Mouse looks like Mickey Mouse, Schroeder looks like Schroeder. Uh, and anything you do to them like is going to lessen the impact of who that character is, because they're so clearly viewed through their beautiful model version. um but like, and same for Kid Beowulf and Grendel. Like I didn't deviate, I didn't intend to deviate from the way that they look. I just drew them with my textures and stuff. But if I'm doing, Robin Hood, or if I'm doing Dracula or something along those lines, those have a degree of flexibility with interpretation. And my hope with any of those is that the final product feels inevitable, that you look at them and you're like, oh, of course he'd be wearing that because such and such. But that might be an of course that hopefully I brought to the table, that you didn't necessarily see this character wearing this before I drew it. But then once I drew it, you're like, yeah, well, naturally she'd have this haircut, or he'd be wearing these boots or something. And to bring a little bit of that sense of understand, and I think that's important also, and that's also why I only really tackle things that for which I have an enthusiasm and a passion, is I think that conveys a sense of understanding about the character that creates a bridge between me and whoever's looking at it if they share that understanding and familiarity. That it makes it less of just you're drawing fan art and more of a look, me and you, we both get Mary Bennett, we both get Jotaro, we both get whoever it is,
Yeah, it's that
and
specificity. I mean, you said it
yeah,
before, it's the verisimilitude. And that's,
yeah,
which I think so many of fans of yours, and I count myself among them, are, we're literature buffs, we're history buffs, we're mythology buffs, we're, the swash and buckle, we're drawn to that. And so I think those of us who read your work and come across that interpretation, like this is that great little zine that you did, Swords with Names, and there's a great depiction here of Rodrigo Diaz, El Cid, and that you did. And I remember when I came across this, I'm like, yep, that's great. That's how he should look. There's a version of Roland in here, and both characters who I've drawn and done books on.
Yeah.
But
I
your
was like, you've got
approach
Nelson,
is,
you've got his two swords.
yeah, but mine are like, here's Roland, who's terrific. Mine are just much more fanciful because that's just sort of the idiom is more geared toward that, and yours are.
Well, and also you notice I am not drawing these characters in a comic. Like if I were to draw Roland like that in a comic, it would create all sorts of narrative obstacles. Like you can't see the direction his head is turning with that Carolingian hood. Like it really like you don't get the degree of body specificity under the scale. Like there's a lot of stuff that you can do differently when you're doing a single image versus when you're having to think about how that image is going to work narratively over especially a long period. Like the characters that you're using are frequently not one-offs. Like a lot of them are returning characters. They're lengthy in the part of the story that they have, and I assume that they're going to show up again at some point. And so
it took me several versions of armor for El Cid before I realized, okay, I got to draw this for 200 pages.
Yeah, I know it.
I have to make some concessions.
You absolutely do. Like I had thought about doing a Landschnitt comic, and it's impossible. At least to do a comic the way that I would want to do it. I think I guess theoretically, if somebody wanted to do it the same way they do those the CG but made to look like line drawing animations, I don't know that anybody's doing that with comics yet. I think there's a lot of model facilitated comics. I don't know that anybody is animating stuff and capturing the line and using that as the thing. But I feel like that's the only way you can do some of these really complicated historical things. But for that book, it's just single images, so I didn't have to worry about that. So I have a lot more flexibility than I think a cartoonist working on a comic would be in terms of like, well, how does this come across? And that's something that I can use when doing those paper figure sets that I do for Patreon, but also, when I'm figuring out like what the armor is going to be for Outlaw's Apprentice, which I know like how the armor works, it's fairly minimal and it does not obfuscate joints, and it does not like it's shoulder pads, it's forearm guards, it's helmets, occasionally a dangling chest plate. Like there's almost nothing that requires thinking about the mechanics or ways that are going to clunk up clarity of an anatomical movement when you're moving, and so you do that design based on what you're needing to do with it.
Well, because I assume you're promising us plenty of sword fights to come.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So these guys got to move, right?
Yeah. And so thinking about also, I don't want there to be so much armor. Like I want, when somebody's wearing armor, I want that armor to be able to reasonably deflect blows. I think most things we watch when people are wearing armor, there are occasional exceptions, but usually swords just cut through it like butter. Like it doesn't matter. Or like stormtroopers getting blasted with lasers.
Right.
Stormtroopers getting blasted with lasers, that's fine. I get it. Ewoks throwing rocks at stormtroopers and it still killing them, like that's the part that feels a little bit wonky to me, because otherwise I guess if it's just to dehumanize you and scare your enemies, then that's one thing, but like it's armor, like it should have some sort of armor quality. And so, as we get into more sword fights in the second book, second arc, however you want to look at it, like there's blocking with the forearm, there's catching stuff on your shoulder, like moving in, because as long as a point isn't going through it, like it's gonna block a blow, and you may get a bruise, but it's going to if you're going to have armor, I want to incorporate it into those fight scenes, because I don't think that's done to my satisfaction when I'm watching a lot of historical stuff, and I feel like it's, again, that's a degree of verisimilitude that I can bring to the story that'll hopefully make it feel a little richer.
Well, let me ask you this, because we can go down this tangent. Where you're a martial artist, I'd say
former martial artist.
Former martial artist.
I'm doing it again. I'm visiting. I've got a couple of friends who I used to train with that I'm meeting with once a week and doing stuff again. They have consistently done it for the past 20 years, whereas I've taken a 20-year break. Former, but a familiarity with. Yeah.
Right.
And you fence.
Yeah, and I fence saber, but Olympic style saber. I'm not doing historical reenactment style saber. But the reason I bring it up is because sort of going, I guess the theme of our chat sort of is the theatricality of some things, and when I think of great sword fighting, there's Scaramouche, and there's, I thought the Mask of Zorro had some terrific set pieces. When you're going to be doing your fencing and fighting on the page, are you going for more of a historically accurate thing, or is it going to be more flamboyant? Like, how are you?
That's a really good question, and I think that I am definitely going to be leaning more theatrical. And there's a couple of things to that. One, so far, because it is fantasy, I do have a degree of latitude with what constitutes real and not. And, the characters, Erskine will be teaching Otis how to sword fight over the course of the series, and how to get better at it. And, I have invented what this sword fighting approach is, again, leaning very hard into the American style. So like I watched a lot of Kung Fu movies growing up. And so I like how different things can be assigned, these are elements, or these are animals, or things like that. And so I was like, well, what would be a good way of quantifying or codifying a thing? And it's basically like, from what is your starting position in a guard, like where or in what movement are you set up to do? And so I break it down to 4, and it's turkey, alligator, what is it? Turkey, alligator, chicken, hawk. It was like falcon or something. I was like, I gotta really rural American it up. So it's chicken, hawk.
Nice.
And alligator, and why am I suddenly blanking? Okay.
Ferret?
No, there's
fox.
Rattlesnake. So thrusts are rattlesnake. And because of that, and talking about like how blocking is done and things along those lines, like all of these will play out in Otis's fight scenes, and you can see him using them as you go, because I do have sort of like a little inner monologue type of thing happening at various points. But it also allows me to control like what is accurate within the framework of this world. The main thing so far as accuracy goes is, yes, if I've done a bunch of sword stuff, but if I fought anybody who actually knows sword things, I would be killed instantly. Like there, and I think that's one of the biggest inaccuracies with a lot of movie things is that really there's not a lot of room for error.
Sure.
And but the thing for me that I want to take, my favorite fight choreographer is Bill Hobbs, and so he did like he's most well known for doing things like the Three Musketeers, the Richard Lester one, and other things in that vein where there's incorporation of environmental elements. Somebody might be sword fighting, but they may also grab a candelabra or a saddle or whatever it might be, or swing. So one of his things that he gets called on a lot is the golf club swing, which is somebody picks up a sword and starts swinging it by the blade, like to hit somebody in the head. And it does create a sense of, freneticness and things like that. But the thing that I really like about him, depending on the movie, but most of his movies, is that there is a sense that the moves matter. And I love the theatricality of Bob Anderson, who did, Princess Bride and Mask of Zorro and things along those lines. And I do love those fight scenes, but they are dances. And that's not a bad thing, but there is a consequentiality, that may be the wrong word for it, but you know what I mean, with a lot of the Hobbs fights, where every time somebody throws a blow, you think this blow could end the fight.
There's a rough and tumble component to it.
There's a rough and tumble component to it, and I do want to carry that energy across. So I want it to, so the movements themselves will be theatrical, because theatrical movements are good. You want big movements, you want big swings. If there's a thrust, you want it to, be a thing that somebody can, lean back and avoid or pivot to the side. But I do want it to feel like, if somebody's swinging a sword, what happens matters. Like, it's not just, you don't just go through the motions of a fight, clang, 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 and then somebody falls down. Like, each time one of my bad guys makes a cut, it's going to hopefully be a different type of cut that requires a different type of response, whether that's ducking behind something, whether that's blocking it, whether it's moving in. Because I do, one, action is fairly tough to get across in comic form. And I want it to feel dynamic, and I want it to feel, to have momentum, and I want it to be clear as to what's happening. But you also don't want anybody tuning out during the fight scenes. Like, you want it to feel like there's a suspense there, even though Erska, is an incredibly accomplished sword fighter. To the point that, and something that I want to deal with in this is that I think that with a lot of fields, an early natural proficiency sometimes precludes being self-aware and reflective about how one does that. And so, because she was a what's blanking on my words here, like where you are good at a prodigy, because she was a prodigy when she was younger and continues to be very good. She may not be all that aware of her own deficiencies, and that'll sometimes come into play. And so, because a lot of hers is more natural ability than cultivated ability, and I think that there's a balance between the two. And forget where I'm going with that. Anyway, no, not historical, but I do want to create a framework for a feeling of accuracy within the context of the world, that we do not deviate from how things work. Like, that a sword hurts. So if Erska gets stabbed, like, she's going to be largely out of commission during a fight. Like, she's not going to, keep powering through the way that sometimes you do in movies,
Right.
depending on how the wound is sustained and that kind of thing.
Right.
And so I want to bring a sense of realism within that theatricality, but it's all fake, it's all invented, but it's hopefully invented in a way that feels plausible to somebody
Hmm.
who likes action stuff or does their own sword fighting or things like that. You're not going to say, well, no, this could never work. You'll say,
Right.
oh, okay, I'll buy it.
The fight choreography discussion is leads me to another question I had for you, and I'm just wondering, the format that you've chosen to do your pages in is really unique in that it reads beautifully on the phone. It's multiple panels. For those who haven't seen, it's multiple panels on the page, as opposed to, when I transfer my comic pages to Webtoon, it's basically one panel per
Yeah.
page, and you have the vertical scroll going up,
Mhm.
and I'm sort of retrofitting the
Yeah.
printed page for the digital page. But it seems as though you've, like a lot, like another of our themes, like you put a lot of thought into how you're going to present this digitally for the screen. Can you walk me through that? How you arrived at that? How, if
Yeah.
this will go to print, and then I guess that's linked to the idea of our sword fighting conversation. Of like, will these great sword fighting scenes be hampered by this format you've chosen?
Those are both really, really good questions, I think. So far as format goes, one of the things that I really wanted to address in doing this, because I knew I wanted to serialize it, and I knew that I wanted it to be in print. And serialization these days, if you are wanting to reach a wider readership or a younger readership, then it needs to be phone readable. Like yes, there are website readers, but largely the teen audience especially is reading things in scrolling format, Webtoon, Stoppas, whatever it might be. And there is a translation issue between print and uh, scroll format comics. And it's usually done two ways. Either things are native to scroll, in that you have a series of panels that are, when it is time to go to print, they are assembled onto a page in the best approximation of what will create a solid page read. Uh, and I feel like this creates some issues, and some people are better at it than others in terms of doing it. But for me, there's such a being able to read through a page is so important, and I think that sometimes when you encounter cartoonists that are doing things individually and assembling them after the fact to create a page, it's usually very noticeable to me because there isn't directional reading that leads your eye through the page. And so that's a little bit of a factor. Also, in changing stuff, folks who are doing digital lettering and whose lettering is on a separate layer, like, it's not as much of a thing. Even when I'm doing digital lettering, it's always been part of the art. I never have separate balloons,
Mm.
because um, I think of the balloon around, or sorry, the line around a word balloon as part of the inks, and it needs to interact with the inks in that way. Like, I don't want to inadvertently create tangents or create, uh, obstacles. I also don't want to have to draw what's underneath them. It saves me time to just
Hmm.
draw around where the word balloon is going to be. But mainly it's because I want it to all interact with each other as best as possible. So I think that for folks who are resizing and reshaping their balloons that way, it's not as big a deal. But for me, it would be a very big deal to break that up. The other is what you're doing, which is taking something that is intended for print and breaking it up into segments that will work on a scroll read. And that creates its own problems as well, especially when you get to bigger, more detailed panels. So if you have a splash page or something like that, those details are going to be a lot smaller than your audience is going to be able to parse without stopping to zoom in, if that's possible on
Right.
the webtoons. And if they're reading it on a browser, on a computer, those reproduce big and it's not a big deal. But on a phone, it creates an obstacle. And also, as do things like inset panels. Like if you have an inset panel in one of these larger panels, do you have to do that panel wholly separate? Again, are you drawing more as a result? So there's these translation issues moving from one of these formats to another. And so what I wanted to do was basically figuring out, well, what is the phone dimension, and can I reasonably replicate and treat that as my maximum size for panels? So like if I had a splash page, it is the phone dimension, or your average phone dimension screen. And can I, if I were to print at that size, would it feel like a satisfying print experience? And I've, in doing a bunch of different print tests where I'm like printing stuff out and checking how small can I make my font? How big can I make my font? How small can I make, basically like font size and dimensions. I found that basically what I'm doing on a phone screen can pretty closely correlate with mass market paperback printing. And so I could treat my pages as pages and still put them on Webtoon without any alteration and have them be very readable on that format. And then when it comes time to go to press, I'm doing a much smaller book with contextually bigger text on a page compared to most comics, but because I'm doing it smaller and I'm drawing it smaller, it will print on mass market paperback size, and so I can have these smaller books that translate really well, and the people who read it online are not going to see any differences with the reading experience when they move to print. And I know that some people like who read something like Lore Olympus and they move to print and it doesn't feel the same to them as when they were reading it online. I want to make sure that mine feels the same regardless of which platform you're doing, because then that encourages you, if you are a web reader who wants a physical copy, you know that you're getting that same feel of reading experience when you're going to be revisiting it.
Yeah. No, it's really a smart way to do it, and I imagine probably saves you some time in that from Webtoon to print.
Yeah, I basically, as soon as the pages are done, they're ready to go to print. I mean, I'll need to go through and just check things and touch them and do a few touch-ups and a little bit of color correcting. Colors always print a little darker than you're expecting it to, so I have a method that tends to work, which is I have my line art, my blacks stay black, but my colors I go into hue saturation and I lighten them by 10 on Photoshop and then up the saturation by 15 to account for that. And that usually makes them print about what they look like on the screen. And so I mean, like there's technical aspects, but when I was to do the original pages, I'm inking this traditionally and lettering it traditionally, partially because I really enjoy that, partially because it speeds me up. I can't be as perfect when I'm working on paper. And that keeps me from fixing a line over and over. There is value in saying that something is perfect, but
something else needs to get done.
It's still at 87%, and nobody's going to notice the difference except me, and it's fine. And so it helps with that. Also, because I'm doing this one myself, I'm going to be doing it on Kickstarter. I wanted to make sure that I had means by which to monetize every aspect of it, because if I don't have an advance, I have to have something to live on. And so having original pages that I can make as part of a reward tier is going to make it easier for me to hopefully have more people backing at a higher tier. But I determined how big the pages are going to be by basically what's the smallest I could do and still have complete control over the lettering, because the lettering is not the easiest for me. And so I did a lot of tests, and I found that the page size at which I'm working with the pen size at which I'm doing, like that is the smallest I can do before my lettering starts to suffer. And so that's what determined I mean, the dimensions remained the same.
Sure.
And scanning it in, making sure that it reads when it's reduced. But that's what determined my work size, was how small could I do it before I'm teetering on the tightrope of
Are you
competency.
doing it on 8.5 by 11?
No,
Or
so
like, what
actually,
is your page
weird.
size?
So my page size, I'm doing them on legal size paper. So it's
Oh,
I mean, I'm
eight and
using
a
a,
half by
a heavy
14.
cardstock, but it's 8.5 by 14. And the actual image size is probably, I say probably, I could just look. I'm in front of my computer. Um, the actual image size is about 6 inches by 11 inches. So it's fairly small. But I need that bigger page because I need the white around it, or otherwise it feels like I'm doodling on notebook paper.
Sure.
Um, uh, but that, yeah, so about 6 by 11. And that gives me the room to do it. Now, when it comes to those sequences where it's like, can I fit this in here? I found that I do. I found that when I don't have dialogue, I use more panels, because the dialogue tends to be the main factor when it comes to panel size. And so when people are fighting, I will have two panels across, maybe even three panels across, whereas usually I have one. And so, like in the second book, I've got a fight scene at the very beginning, and instead of my usual average of probably three panels. I do a lot of 2 and 3 panel pages in this book. Um, it's got 5 or 6 on most of those pages. And so I can still work in that stuff. And so, there'll be a larger panel to contextualize what's going on. You'll see the characters in relation to each other and in relation to the environment. And then I can focus in on the individual things that are happening. These swords are hitting, this foot is doing this elbow is hitting the guy here. And because you've contextualized it with that larger image in the first one, you can shift to these close-ups of the subsequent actions that are happening. And then you don't pull back again until you need to establish the new context that these moves have created, the new spatial context. And so I am able to work in more stuff, but it is a little more challenging than was doing something like Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton, where I have a full comic page to do these fight scenes. So there is a challenge to it, but it's less of one than I thought there would be. I thought it was going to be really tough, but I just kind of pack things in a little more tightly.
Um, I just want to say you've been super generous with your time, and this has been very fun. So I appreciate all that you're sharing. And you just said book 2, so I gotta
Mhm.
ask, like,
Oh
so
yeah.
where are we? Like, how how long is Outlaw's Apprentice? How have you mapped it all out? Like, how far are
So
we in to the bigger
in
story?
terms of what has serialized, I think we are a little bit shy of halfway through the first book. At the moment. So chapter 7, I think, is maybe up through page 89, I think, of 198.
Okay.
But what I'm wanting to do with this, and part of the reason I wanted to serialize this, I am not intending to take serialization breaks between the books or arcs. I really want to. One of the things that, I look back at those strip guys, and yeah, they occasionally had a break here and there, but most of the time they're putting the work out and getting it out. And I mentioned Stan and Jeff. Both of them have had times where they've taken breaks, or they've said, I need to take a break for 6 months because I'm falling behind, or I'm doing more business stuff, or I'm doing traveling, or whatever else. But that's the exception. As a rule, they are producing this work and putting it out. And I feel like that's something that has largely disappeared from print publishing, is a creator working on something without spaces between. And that's not definitely the case. There's still people who are doing it, but it's much less common than it used to be. But I think that those offerings of steady regularity of output allow for a larger body of work related to it. Like, because you've got that output, you're creating more stories with these characters. Anyway, so my plan is to keep going, and the first book is the only one where there isn't sort of a fully self-contained narrative within from cover to cover. It is largely set up for this world, and I really wrestled with how to do that. And for a while, the first and what will now be the second book were part of the same, but it was 500 pages long, or would be 500 pages long. I was up through 350 of pencils, and the first part of it, like up until they are sort of fully immersed in their outlawry, which is the end of the first book, that section felt so disparate from the second book that I decided that it's okay to do that. And I was really struggling with whether or not that was okay for a while. And then, I felt like it was the right decision, but I've still been second guessing it. But then I was thinking about Bone a couple of days ago, and I was like, there is no internal finished narrative in the first book. Like, yes, they find Bone and Smiley and Phony reconnect, but it's just set up for the rest of the story, and that's okay. And I never felt like I was shortchanged by that. I enjoyed the reading of the narrative, and I'm not saying my thing is bone quality or is going to create anywhere near as enjoyable a reading experience for the reader, but I'm doing my best, and I feel like a reader isn't necessarily going to be shortchanged because the first book in a series doesn't have a wrap up. Right. And I mean, it does have a sort of wrap up. Like, they do have a thing they have to do, and they accomplish that. But starting with the second book, like, they go to a place, there is this problem. When that problem is solved, or dealt with, or failed to be solved, or whatever, that's the end of that book. Okay. And that'll be the case going forward. But what will be the second book is about half penciled. And I know where it's going loosely. Like, I know what's going to happen, but how I get there is always a surprise to me as I go page to page.
That's great. It's funny. The episodic nature is it seems to be perfect for the way you're distributing it online. And then it also sounds like it's going to be a very satisfying chunk when you read it as a book. Creatively, I'm the new story that I'm working on, I've decided to...
Is this the Odyssey one?
Yeah. To do it in episodes. Primarily because I was reading some manga recently. I'm not a huge manga reader, but I went to this great exhibit about One Piece that was down in San Francisco, and picked up the first volume of it, and I've read some other manga collections, and I've always struck by, like, they're 10 to 16 page episodes, and they sort of just move pretty fluidly. And I thought creatively, like, oh, there must be, like, there's something to this in just doing shorter chunks, and as opposed to how I've been doing the first 4 books, which was like page 1 to 250, which is exhausting. And anyway, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, other than the fact that it seems as though perhaps one can recharge a creative battery a little quicker doing episodes. I don't know if you've found that.
Well, I am not there yet. So basically, the way I've been doing it is I have done so far ahead the way that I would be doing a book. And so I am not so far ahead in terms of final art. I'm doing that a few weeks ahead, because I have this penciled stuff up up through wherever. But I have not yet gotten to the point where I am writing, and what I will eventually get to is writing and drawing a chapter at a time. Like right now, it's written considerably far ahead. And I am really looking forward to seeing how that works. Because I do think that's going to create a very different thing. I would love to do 10 to 16 page chapters, because that is what I have found. The chapters that I've done so far naturally lend themselves to that length. And so almost everything that I've done is within that very specific window. But I do not know that I can do 10 to 16 pages on the weekly in addition to being a functioning human being. That's a
Oh
lot
my
of
gosh, yeah, that's a whole other thing.
that's a lot of page. Even though my pages are smaller, that's still they're effectively 2/3 of what I would be doing on another thing. And so that's still, 10 to 16 pages is like 7 to 10 pages. And that's a lot for a week. Especially because, I'm coloring them. I'm not, I think that there's a lot of Webtoon stuff that is very environmentally skimpy. There aren't necessarily backgrounds and stuff. And I really like those big immersive backgrounds, and I want to continue to do those because I like them aesthetically, but also they tend to play into the narrative and how everything works out. And so that all complicates how much I can do. And so probably I will have to start writing with the clear sense of this is going to be 5 to 8 pages for a chapter. Like how do I finding where that cap is going to be and making it feel natural? Because what I've done up until now is I write until the end of a scene feels like the end of a scene, and that happens to be within 10 to 16 pages. And I'm going to have to probably rethink that at a certain point, just because now, if somehow this does a lot better than I'm expecting and I don't have to worry about other income streams, maybe I can devote more time to it. Right now I'm devoting all my time to it, but I don't know. Who knows? We'll see.
Right.
We'll see. Because
No,
I'm not really sure. I'm hopeful that it will start to feel intuitive after a little while.
yeah, and I by no means wanted to suggest that I'm doing 10 to 16 pages on the regular at all.
No, I know you're looking at the manga and you're seeing that as a thing.
Yeah.
But I think that Beowulf will lend itself really well towards chapter release, because you already have sort of little internal cliffhangers within the books, and I think just treating those as chapter breaks, like you could go through, and I guess you have, you can go through and see where your natural chapters are and start to think, well, like where are these? Because a lot of times it's scenes, and your scenes aren't. Some of your scenes are longer than other scenes, but they do have places within them where there's you could clearly break it. And a lot of times that's going to be cliffhanging. And so I think that I think it will feel very natural when you move to structuring it that way.
Yeah, no, so far been the working on the Odyssey it's been a natural thing, only because I'm also patterning after the Odyssey, and there were 24 chapters, so I'm sort of like, I'll try and do 24 episodes. So, but
that's great. I love that.
Yeah, we've already got it figured out. But so as we wrap up, I have just a last couple of questions for you. I guess, namely, are you pleased with the reception you've had thus far for
I am,
Outlaws?
So people seem to have, the biggest thing with anything like this is you hope people like it. And the people that I've heard from seem to like it, and that makes me really happy. Because I've been working on this to in some degree or another, like starting to put. I mean, the first couple of years was just formulating what it is, but for 5 years, it's been 5 years from
Wow.
when I initially conceived the doing of it, which started with figuring out what the world is going to be and figuring out who my characters were. So that was in February of 21, and that's a couple months before 5 years from when I started serializing it. So it's been a much longer stretch than most of my projects are, but because of that, so much of that is advance work for this as a series, like where it's going to go, what's going to happen, thinking about. I want to make sure that when I do introduce certain elements, they don't feel like they come out of nowhere. And so there's a lot of seed planting in this first book that is going to yield fruits as it goes along, in terms of subject and narrative and things along those lines. And so that part has been a struggle, but I think that now that is out of the way, everything else is just the adventures as they befall them. And so that's going to be fun. But you work on this thing for 5 years, and gosh, you sure hope that it's going to be okay.
Right.
And so people are responding to it, and people are responding to the parts of it that I want them to respond to, and that's really big too. Which is very exciting. So I've been very happy so far with the reception.
There's
Now,
always I was just say there's always the danger for creators to project or map out too far. But is this, do you sort of
oh
see
yeah,
this as your bone or your Usagi? Like this is going to be
I
your,
mean, I think we think
you've
that
done
with
so
every
many
project that we do. I
projects.
thought that for Crogan Adventures. I thought that for the Creeps. Like
Yeah.
that is what I think. But who knows if that will be the case. I hope that it will. I'm approaching. I read a biography of it was less a biography of Victor Hugo than it was a book about his writing of Les Miserables. And one of the things that was really interesting was how business oriented he was when he set out to do this. Like he thought about like how it's going to serialize, who it's going to go with for a publisher, how to do the the advertisement for it ahead of time, like when he needed to finish these particular parts. Like he's still approaching the book itself through a strictly artistic lens, but he is considering all of the periphery ahead of time, and the doing of it is what helped to make that a widely read and this classic novel. And that's something that I really wanted to come out with this one. Like I didn't want to just make it and hope that people would like it. I wanted to plant advance excitement for it by sharing behind the scenes things as I went along on Patreon and social media. I've been planning my library strategy for it. I've been planning my Kickstarter strategy for it, like well in advance of doing the first page. And
Wow.
that stuff is not determining at all what is in the comic itself, but hopefully it is putting me in a position where it has more of a chance of reaching a wider audience and thus becoming my big thing.
Right. Right.
And
And you've been also like for those who are, watching this or reading it or listening to this who haven't seen your work, nothing is behind the paywall.
yeah,
You can read it on your Patreon. You can read it on WEBTOON.
yeah.
You
And
do these
same with the
great,
behind the scenes stuff.
yeah. I was going to say these great,
Yeah,
but deep dive behind the scenes stuff for process junkies. Like you're being really generous with how you are
yeah.
positioning this new work.
Well, and part of that also, that's also part of the Kickstarter strategy is it's always been, so I grew up, less so with each passing year, but when I was a kid and, up through middle school, uh, we had very limited financial resources. And as a result, I never want my work to be inaccessible to people because of their inability to pay for it. And so because of that, I have historically priced my stuff probably lower than I can make a comfortable living with. I can make a living with it, and that is wonderful. But it means that when I'm doing a Kickstarter book or whatever it might be, I'm charging a lot less than what a lot of my peers are charging for comparable work. And when Liz and I were talking about do we do this self-publishing or do I go through a traditional publisher, and I'm really glad that I decided to do it self-publishing because it offers me a degree of agency that I think will benefit the project in the long run, both in terms of content, but also in terms of like how I release it to the public and what I do to bolster enthusiasm for it. We were looking at, people who have a similar aesthetic or people who have a similar audience. And I'm like, look, this person made this much on Kickstarter. This person made this much on Kickstarter. And my wife, Liz, is like, yes, but Chris, look what they're charging for their book. Like, he's charging $40. This person's charging $35. It's a shorter book than yours. It's a thing. And like, you always want to cap at like 15. And I was like, it's okay for me to charge more for a book. So this first one will be about 200 pages. I will probably charge $20 for it. But because it's available for free on Webtoons, because it's available for free on Patreon, I don't feel the moral obligation to make the print collection as cheap as I can literally afford to make it with the cost of printing, because I am not cutting off access to anybody who wants to read it. The book becomes an object, and you're paying for the object. And that, I think, makes it a little more economically viable to go forward with it. But that's a big reason why I don't want to put stuff behind a paywall in general. Also, when I was a student, especially, and wanting to learn cartooning, we were dirt poor. Like I was a full-time student. Liz had a job, but anything I could get my mitts on for free, like I wanted to. And so I want to make sure that especially other aspiring cartoonists have access to the behind the scenes stuff, because it may give them ideas for how they want to approach their own work. Not saying that my way of doing things is the right way to do things, but it may spur light bulbs for people about the way that they want to do things and different avenues to
Absolutely,
pursue that.
yeah. And I would encourage anybody who is a creator listening to us to hop on your Patreon, because there is such a wealth of knowledge in how you make
and I
comics
will say
there.
You can pay for the Patreon. Like, I love it if you do pay for the Patreon. But I basically treat it like a tip jar or an NPR or whatever, where you like that I'm making this stuff available and you want to see it continue. But again, I don't, especially at times are hard economically. Like, I don't want to put anybody to where they're not able to enjoy what other people are enjoying, because I think that there are enough people who are in a position where they can pay for it, that it helps to subsidize those who can't.
Right. Yeah, no, it's I think your strategy across the board, as I've seen it and as you've described it, is really smart. And
well, let's hope it is, because I can't do math.
Hey, no, you and me both.
I'm guessing it.
I was having a conversation not too dissimilar with my wife about the Kickstarter and it coming up and how to price things and all this stuff. And it's we're working in an idiom that is, I think our stuff is akin to what you'd see that's being published by First Second, Scholastic, a lot of top tier publishers who can do a price point that we can't unfortunately match, because we're self-publishing.
And I think even Scholastics have gone up considerably. And so I think Scholastic is the only one with notably low price points. I think almost everybody else is at a $20 and up price point. I may be wrong about that. But I feel like there's not as much of a disconnect as there used to be. Like the Scholastic books used to all be like $10 across the board, and I think a
Right.
lot of them are minimum $12.99 now, and some a bit more than that. So it's like there's still a disparation between the two, but I'll make them available to libraries for cheap. I feel like direct market kid sales are going to be, or direct kid sales are going to be pretty skinny. And because I'm doing it myself, like if I do find myself doing like school things or something like that, I'll figure out some sort of discount for the kids, the same way that I would for retailers. But that's a road I'll cross when I come to it. Like I can making more per copy because I'm doing them myself is going to give me a degree of flexibility that I otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so this has been super fun. I guess I should let you get back to your studio, your process. You're making great comics. I guess my last question for you before we sign off. So you've been doing this for 20 plus years, in all sorts, like whether as a freelancer, as a creator, cartoonist, as a illustrator, and now you're moving in this new direction with Outlaws and self-publishing, which is exciting. For somebody starting out, for like if there is that potential listener or viewer who's a young cartoonist, is there something you would recommend? Like how do they dive it? They have a massive epic like you that they want to put out there. Any recommendations? Well, any advice you'd give for them?
My first bit of advice is don't do a massive epic. Don't do a massive epic. And I think that like if you look at the ones that are successful, so you look at Kazu's Amulet, or you look at Jeff Smith's Bone, or you look at Stan Sakai's Usagi, all of those guys were about 30 before they started doing that and had a significant number of comics under their belt. Jeff had done I think Stan was probably 30 when he started Usagi, or very close to it. Jeff had done a rough draft of Bone effectively for his college newspaper. He had worked in animation a lot. Stan had done a bunch of different things. Kazu had done the Flight books and Bolt City and Daisy Cutter, and like they knew what they were doing before they got to the epic. Like they didn't cut their teeth on a really long project because there is such it's going to change so much between the beginning and the end. And that's the story of early webtoons. A lot of those early webtoons, especially narrative ones, the beginning looks like it was done by an entirely different person than the person that goes along. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when you are moving into print, when you were doing it as a print collection, if you are intending to do print, it's tricky to have that very clear learning curve so evident on the page. And so I find it to be a lot more useful to tackle smaller projects, because you also get a sense. So like the earlier you are in your artistic development as a cartoonist, the shorter your project should be. And some of that is also just to learn narrative. Like it is harder narratively to do a satisfying 6-page comic than it is to do a satisfying 60-page comic. You're going to learn what matters and what doesn't, how to structure a story, but most importantly is you can finish it. It is really easy to feel overwhelmed. It's also really easy. 1/3 through every single project that I do, and I think this is the case with almost everybody, it sucks. You look at that project and you think, there's no way that this will ever be good. What was I thinking? I made so many wrong decisions in terms of what I was going to do, how I was going to do, etc. Like this is unsalvageable. But it's always salvageable. Like there's a period where every drawing you do, every whatever, but especially longer form stuff, it's gonna suck. And the shorter that project is, the shorter that duration of feeling like it sucks is gonna be, and the easier it is to get past it. I'm at the point now where I can just turn that off and say, oh, this is the part where it sucks, and not fret over it. I just know that it sucks and that it's going to get better. But that stage never goes away. It's always there. And it can be really debilitating, and you want to step away from a project. And if your project is short, the debilitation is much less. Like, you don't have time to do it. And so trying to do something that has a complete narrative within it. And that's why I think when I started out, there was, that was sort of the heyday of autobio indie comics. And so most of my first comics that I did were a little anecdote. It's me shaving my beard. It's me playing kickball with some friends and we got heckled. It's me, whatever. You have a little anecdote. You try and figure out how to paste that as a comic and make a satisfying narrative, the way that you would tell it as a story at dinner. And what was great about that era is that there were people who were looking for that kind of thing and wanting to read it. And so you felt a sense of approbation because you finished this, and also there was an audience waiting for it. But that can be, if you're having trouble thinking of a fiction story that you can do in a short form, like think about doing a little, about dramatizing a little autobio vignette that happened in your life. And if you don't want it to be you, do it on a space station. It's still you getting your chicken nugget order wrong, but now it's in space, or now it's armadillos instead of people, or whatever it might be. You can still approach it the same way that you want to do those comics, but it gives you a framework that is, you can wrap your head around and that you can tackle in very short form. And then you have something you can share to people and say, look what I did. And when you get to page 7, which if it's your first 6 comic pages, page 7 is going to look different than page 1. When you get to your 7th page of a comic, you're starting fresh, and then you can do page 7 through 15 as a new cartoonist, and then your next story is your 16th page up through what, and so on and so forth. And as you grow, each individual chunk of narrative that you're doing is its own thing, and you don't have to feel ashamed of it as your skills become stronger by virtue of the doing of it. And the earlier you are in your career, the more exponential each leap in a few pages is going to be in terms of how fast you can do it. Things that seem like they're going to take forever, and that do take forever when you're starting out, take less and less time the more you do it. I'm sure that's the case with you, Lex, where something that would have taken you 3 days now takes you 30 minutes. And that doesn't mean there's not still stuff that takes you a really long time, but not everything takes a really long time. And when you're starting out, everything takes a really long time. And that's a real treat as you start to get faster, but you start to get faster fast. Like it's much quicker than you think it's going to be.
Yeah, and you can turn on the gauge quicker as well, as you're ramping up into whatever process, whatever part of the process you're sliding into. At least for me, I've realized, okay, it's always tough to start, but once I get going, I get going. And to your point, there are always going to be moments where you're drawing something and it sucks. The drawing doesn't work. It's not coming together. You feel like, have I forgotten how to draw? Like, how do, like at the beginning of every new project, I'm like, have I forgotten how to do this? And then, but eventually it comes back, and the more you do it, the quicker it comes back. So, So, well, Chris, thank you so much for this shop talk. That you, as I said, you've been really generous with your time and insight. It's always, as I said at the top, I've been a long time admirer of your work. I always like to see every new project that you bring to life because you give it such great, fun scrutiny. It's just fun to read and fun to see it develop. So
thank you so much, Lex. I really appreciate it. And I love the way that you incorporate so many disparate mythologies and legends and stuff within Kid Beowulf. Like, it's really fun. It's similar to what I want to do with the different locales and genres and stuff with Outlaw. Like, you're taking these classic, I don't know what you'd call them, pre-authorial, like
I suppose.
but you're taking these things and you're putting all into one world, and I just think it's done so delightfully. And when you are posting this, are you running a Kickstarter during the posting of this?
Yeah.
I know we're recording it ahead of time.
Right.
For people who may have tuned in to this from my sharing it, what is that Kickstarter and where can they find it?
Oh, I appreciate it. It's going to be called, the URL is kidbycomickickstarter.com. And I'll throw that up on the screen for the video version. It's a comic book that I'm doing that collects the first 3 chapters from the new book, Kid Beowulf Odyssey. So in this event, Beowulf and Grendel are separated, and they've moved into the land of myths and monsters. Grendel encounters the sirens and Scylla and Charybdis.
I really like your Scylla design a lot. Like, I think that's a great design.
So that's kind of the meat of it. It's as I said during our conversation, I'm sort of doing them episodically, and it's the Odyssey summer. I'm looking forward to the Christopher Nolan movie. I hope it's good. I don't know if you've been keeping tabs on it or not. Or
I am looking forward to seeing it. I have not been. Yeah. I tend to stay out of it until it's out in the theaters, and then I'll be excited to see it. So same with Death of Robin Hood. Same with a bunch of stuff. I'm like, there are things that I know I'm looking forward to watching, but I don't keep up with the news.
Yeah. Well, your nose is to the grindstone. You're making out. You're making great comics. So
well, thank you very much. Well, Lex, I really do appreciate your talking to me today. It's a real treat. It's always good to see you.
Likewise.
And hopefully I'll see you at a show sometime soon. Are you doing ALA this year?
Not this year. I thought about going to Chicago, but didn't make it. But you'll be on the floor. You'll be there.
I will be on the floor this year. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah. I look forward to seeing it at the whatever next show is
all right
happening. But
fingers crossed. Well, thanks again, Lex.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shop Talk, brought to you by Kid Beowulf Odyssey. Funding now at kidbycomickickstarter.com.